Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? Had a beautiful day, beautiful night. Definitely a good night to be out and together, studying God's Word. And we're going to pick up, well, we might overlap a little bit when I was looking at my notes. But we're going to pick up with the subject of giving. We were discussing last week. We talked about the contribution, the timing, and so forth. And we're down at, I think we were discussing Philippians 4:15, and I had kind of rushed through it, so I thought we'd pick up there, if I remember correctly. And Paul says, "Ye Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only." And what we discussed last week is that word communicated. Because that really, at least when I read over this verse, it doesn't really say a whole lot to me as far as what it actually means, because it's not really a word we use as far as this weight in our modern days. But if we look at different translations, the New King James says that no church shared with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only. So that's a little closer to the way we would talk or use this phrase. The American Standard says, "No church had fellowship with me in this matter of giving and receiving, but ye only." And that's a lot closer to the way we would talk today, and would get the meaning out of that a little easier when we're reading that verse. And then I believe it's the English Standard Version where Paul said, "No church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except ye only." And that's what we see when we look at the Greek word for this. Where the King James says, "No one communicated with me," that word, we can see the Strong's reference number for it, because I can't pronounce it and remember how to look it up that way. But when we look, we can see the definition of it: to come into communion or fellowship with, to become a sharer, be made a partner, or to enter into fellowship, joins oneself to associate, make oneself a sharer or a partner. So we can see that those definitions a little clearer and easier in some of the other translations, but they all mean, even the King James, even though that may not be the way we speak, still meets the definition, or is the definition of the word. But what we see is the church in Philippi being in fellowship or partnership with Paul because they were contributing to his effort at where he was working at a different location and so forth. And then the very next verse, Paul even says, or concludes, "For even in Thessalonica ye sent once and again unto my necessity." So we can see that they sent him money when he needed it. And we see in other locations, where Paul, and I think we even looked at one last week, where he said, we didn't ask for money, we worked ourselves not to take money, but we preached the gospel. He didn't want to take away from the spreading of the gospel. So, and we know from some of the verses he was a tent maker, but we can see there are sometimes he needed help, and we can see that Philippi did that time and again, and sometimes they were the only ones helping, and we can see that, and we'll touch on again on that a little bit later, but we can see the importance, even, when we look at the effort we're giving in Kenya, where we're helping with the well and now the filter system to help them out. That's a partnership with the preacher, with the congregations there to help them out. And that was, one reason Mike spent so much time making sure what school he went to, what he taught, what he believed, and it was a sound preacher that we're helping in the area. So we know that when he's at the well and people are coming and getting water and he's preaching them the gospel, he's preaching the real gospel, preaching the truth. That's our fellowship with them. So we're making sure we've got a correct partnership. So it's important for us to do our due diligence when we are doing something of that nature. And that's what we've seen in that case. Does anyone have any questions or comments up to this point? All right, in Acts 24, verse 17, Paul says, "Now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings." And if you remember at this point, he's defending himself. He's allowed to speak. And he's talking about the money that he had brought from the different collections. And if you remember in 1 Corinthians 16, in verse 2, we had the command to give as we lay by. But in verse 3, we saw he said that when I come and get the collections, I'm going to take it with whoever you authorize to help. We're going to take it to Jerusalem for the needy. And that's what he's talking about here in Acts chapter 24, referencing back to that. And then in Romans 15:26, he even talks about Macedonia and Achaia and how they had been so eager to help. So we see the contributions, the monies collected from different places were being sent to an area where the people needed it. And that's what Paul's referencing there. So we see a use, an important use, of our collections, on the first day of the week. Galatians 6:10 and the next verse, we see some disagreements today in the brotherhood as far as what they mean. Paul says, "We have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith." And what we see here is all men. Our contributions, our money, if we can help someone, we should. Now that, a lot will teach that you can only help Christians with the contribution or with the money that a congregation has. But what we see here is Paul's explanation of all men, all people you can help. He does have here even the last phrase of this verse even helps emphasize that, where he says, especially unto them who are the household of faith. So it does show the importance of us doing our due diligence, that we have to take care of those, other Christians first. But that doesn't mean we don't help others. And we'll see kind of part of the purpose of that here in just a second, and what it serves. But we can see some like to teach that, the reason they don't help other individuals is because they're not Christians and they hold the money in the bank account of the congregation. But we can see that goes against the Scriptures. And Paul in 2 Corinthians 9, he also says, "For the administration of this service, not only supplying the want of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgiving unto God. While the experiment of this ministration, they glorify God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ and for your liberal distribution unto them and to all men." So when we look at this, he's saying the same thing he said in Galatians 6:10. But we see a purpose here that helping other individuals, they're glorifying God because the ones that have the ability to help are doing just that. They're helping when they can, and they're glorifying God. And we see here it's not just for other Christians, but it's also unto all men. And we can even see here it's the liberal distribution unto them, which is other Christians. And then it says, and also unto other men, or all men. So that doesn't mean, as we see in a lot of movies, the Catholic Church trying to take care of the whole world from all the money they have or used to have. But, we have to be, as Paul said in Galatians 6:10, especially the household of faith, we have to be smart with what we have, but we do have the authority to help others as we should. We even saw that in the example of the Good Samaritan. Two strangers didn't know the background of either one, but the one, helped the individual that was hurt and gave of his time and resources, which involved some money. So we see the teaching there of Paul and the reinforcing of it, that we can and should help all people. And as we see here, they glorify God in the process. And, we also see the professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ. So they're glorifying God because they see those that are teaching the gospel, and trying to spread Christianity and teach the truth. They're the ones, helping them in their time of need. So we see part of the purpose of us helping those in need is to glorify God and help spread the truth. And when we see the misuse of funds and the misuse of what we have, then we see people bad-mouthing God or bad-mouthing Christianity and so forth. So that's why it's important for us to do our due diligence and do right with what God's blessed us with. And that's the end of this, I guess you could say, paragraph. Paul said, and by the prayer for you, which long after you for the exceeding grace of God in you, thanks be unto God for his unspeakable gift. And we looked at this verse last week, and this helps explain why we should be so generous and wanting to help others, because of the great gift God has given us. And he even describes it as unspeakable gift. He gave his only son, and then his only son came and did the unspeakable sacrifice for us. If we all think about it, we definitely don't deserve it, but yet he did it for us. So when we see someone that needs a little help, that help that we're giving is nothing compared to what was given for us. And all that goes backwards to glorify God because of what we're doing. Does anyone have any questions or comments, observations, as Wesley says, up to this point?
Only the members of the church could help members of the church as a congregation could only do that. The individual, they argue, can do that without violation of the Scripture. So James said in James 1:27, pure religion undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows. The word visit there don't mean go by and say, hello, how you doing, goodbye. It means you take care of them, you supply their needs. Well, the individual then could practice pure and undefiled religion, but the church couldn't, because they could only help those that are members of the body of Christ according to Son. But think of this, while they won't give a dime, some have even said to a starving baby out of the church treasury, they'll take it. They'll take every dime and anything and center it. Whoever walks in their church buildings and throws money in the contribution plate, they're not going to give it back. But and I use this illustration on TV, but if a man came in here to Stoney Creek and gave us $5,000, what I remember the church, and we put it in the collection, took his money, and he goes home, finds out his house burnt down, comes back wanting help, we can't help him because he's not a member of the church. Well, what kind of Christianity is that? Christianity is just what you said in Galatians and Corinthians, do good unto all men. That's a safe way for the church and for the individual.
That's true. And you can only help as much as you have. So we've got to be smart with what we're doing. But at the same time, that teaching is there. It's unto all men, not just select individuals.
When we had our flood a number of years ago, one lady at C Street lost her mom and dad. They drowned in that flood. It came down from Rome Mountain up to the mountains of Carolina. And there were people that objected to our buying products from the disaster relief fund out of Nashville. And I had to go to a preacher's meeting and talk about that. They were honest about it. They weren't trying to set me up, but they said, we want to know why. We bought a service. We bought their stuff. We had the money to give the disaster relief fund money for the products we were getting. We had done that in town. But many of those same people never gave a dime, not one dime, to help. And one of the members told me, said, well, we can't help everybody. I said, I didn't say you could help everybody. I said, you could have helped us, couldn't you? Could you help us with $1, $5, help somebody that lost their home? See, a lot of times people will fuss over what you can give, but then they don't give a dime for anything. So I told him, I said, I'd rather make a mistake on the other side of it than the one y'all made. I know you made one, because you could have helped them, didn't you?
That's very important. And it also comes to this next verse, I think kind of ties in with it a little bit. In 11:28 through 30, and there stood one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be great drought throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, decided to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. So when we look at this verse, we see that there was a problem, a drought, and a lot of individuals, it says, sent the money. They sent it by Barnabas, and he gave it to the elders when he got there. So I kind of paraphrased it and said the elders are in charge of the treasury because that's who they delivered the money to. We can remember Barnabas and his generous contribution, I guess you could call it, in Acts chapter 4. So what is the purpose of Barnabas delivering the money to the elders instead of Barnabas going and taking care of everyone that needed help?
Number one, to make sure the church got the glory and God. Number two, to make sure the money was used correctly, and they could give an account for the money.
All right. I didn't word it quite that way on number 2. But anyway, the main purpose, as Wesley said, the purpose of giving to the church or to the elders is so that God gets the glory, not the individual. And then, of course, to make sure there's an accounting for the money's used correctly, and so forth. And so we see that, and that doesn't mean you can't help an individual on your own when you see someone that needs it. And when we go to that thought, and you've got versus the church getting the glory and a person getting the glory, what example do we have of individual letting the church get the glory and someone trying to get the glory themselves?
Well, Ananias and Sapphira tried to get the glory.
All right. And just a showing of notes, using notes, you could use asterisks and put that little phrase as far as the purpose of giving to the church yourself. But then when we look at Barnabas, he's on the right side of it, where it says Joseph, who by the apostles was surnamed Barnabas, which is being interpreted the son of consolation, a Levite and of the country of Cyprus, having land, sold it and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. So if you remember, that got a lot of attention. He brought it all, gave it to the church, and let them do with it as needed. But then on the bad side of it, as Wesley said, Ananias and Sapphira, in verse 4, Peter said to him, "Whiles it remained, was it not thine own? After it was sold, was it not in thine own power? Why hast thou conceiving this thing in thy heart? Thou hast lied, or hast not lied unto men, but unto God." And then, of course, both of them, were punished for that act. And they were holding back some of the money, but they were giving a large portion of it, trying to get the glory themselves, or trying to get glory that Barnabas was getting. And we can see through the rest of the scriptures, or the rest of the New Testament, how Barnabas was doing things for the right reason. Barnabas gave all that, but then Barnabas did a lot of mission work, a lot of traveling and teaching and encouraging others. If you remember, he's the one that helped Paul get off to a good start. So we see the example there, and we could put it, that as a note if you wanted to, as far as the example, or Barnabas versus Ananias and Sapphira, as far as one letting the church get the glory. And just as we saw in 2 Corinthians 9:12 through 15, the church, this going through the church is going to give God the glory, not an individual that is looking good or trying to look good themselves by giving all this on their own. So, also, stuff that's not included in here, and we've got notes, or a blank notes page. One thing that we see taught a lot nowadays is the New Testament teaches socialism, some call it communism, as far as what we do with our money or what we're supposed to be doing, as taught in the New Testament. So I kind of just put a header, New Testament giving versus socialism. What are some verses individuals use trying to say that the New Testament teaches socialism? Okay. Acts chapter 2, 44 and 45. And then 2 Corinthians 8 also does it. In verses 44 and 45, all that believed were together, had all things common. They sold their possessions and goods and parted them to all men, as every man had need. And then chapter 4 and verse 32, it says something almost the same thing. And then 2 Corinthians 8 and 14 says, "But by an equality, that now at this time your abundance may supply their lack, that their abundance also may supply your lack, that there may be equality." So there's a give and take, and it changes, and everybody's on an equal playing field, is what many take these verses and teach. I went a little too fast. So how do we know that that's not what's being taught here?
What's been given has been given voluntarily.
Okay.
They all didn't sell all, but a lot of them gave. When Peter was in prison and the angel released him, he came to, I don't remember whose gate it was, and I brought my glasses so I can't read it. But he came to a lady's house. Rhoda was the damsel that came to the gate. They were all in there praying for Peter, so she owned property. But they gave voluntarily of what they gave. Barnabas just gave it all. And Ananias and Sapphira could have resolved to sold it and given 10%. And had they not represented themselves as hadn't given it all, they would not have sinned.
All right, that's correct. So we can see it's not even written as a command. There's no implication that we're supposed to do that we have to do that. It's just recorded. That's what the individuals did. And to me, it's not that hard to see the attitude that would evolve because, it's the day of Pentecost. People had just asked, men and brethren, what shall we do? In the Acts 2:38, they're told what to do for salvation. 3,000 were baptized that day, became, the Lord added them to the church. So we can see the attitude of joy there, the attitude of wanting to help each other. So we can see that attitude, and that's what's recorded here in chapter 2 and in chapter 4. And then the same thing in 2 Corinthians 8. It's just individuals helping each other. Just as Paul said in 1 Corinthians 16, when I come and get the collection, I'm going to take it to Jerusalem, to those in need. And then Macedonia and Achaia, they wanted to help, just like we're wanting to help with the well. We have that attitude and the means. We asked others to help, presented the need, and everybody helped as they could. There was no commandment to have that socialism type mindset where everybody has to be on equal footing. Because we know everyone's got different kind of jobs, different kind of lifestyles, attitudes, what they want to have, and so forth. So that's what we see there. What would be some verses that would actually teach us that what some interpret that and use that, twist that to teach? What are some verses that tell us that that's not what's being taught? Mike alluded to a lot of it. In Acts 5 and 4, Ananias and Sapphira, we read that verse just a moment ago. Peter even said, while you had it, it was in your control. All you had to do was do it correctly. As Mike said, they lied about it. If they wouldn't have lied and just said, this is what we can give, we're keeping this much, everything would have been fine. And then Philippians 4, 15 and 16, as we started out talking about the fellowship that we have helping others. And Paul talked about how the Philippians were in fellowship with them. Then he even talked about how they helped him from time and again. But we see in that context there, they were the only ones helping it sometimes, even though Paul wished others had been helping. They were the only ones helping. So we can see it's not a commandment he had delivered to the churches to support him because he was a missionary or to send money for others, this and that. He made a plea to help others, to have that loving attitude to help others. So we see that it's a teaching as far as we should have the love to want to help others, but it's not a commandment that we've got to give a certain portion of what we own just for others to better their lives. And that's what we see in those verses. And there are other verses, if you had to expound on it and really search that topic. So that's all the notes I have on giving and the topic for giving. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
1 Corinthians 9:7 talks about, I think it's 7, talks about a purposing in your heart. As every man purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity. God loves a cheerful giver. We're to decide in our heart what we plan to give. It's not designated anywhere that we give a certain percentage in the New Testament. But as we grow spiritually, the compassionate side of us should be growing as well. And like you mentioned 3 or 4 times, one of the most edifying things that's happened was to me, was the well and how the outpouring from people. It just was thrilling. I was really humbled by it.
That was thrilling. And with what you said, I probably should have done this on the notes page. Nowhere, as Mike said, nowhere in the New Testament is it given a percentage or a certain amount we're supposed to give. A misteaching we have a lot today is they use the word from the Old Testament, tithing. What is the actual definition of tithing? 10%. And that gets locked on a lot because it's a word you see in the Old Testament. But if you actually go through the Old Testament or the Old Law and you add up what they gave, is it 10%? All right, it's around 30. I've heard up to 33. So I probably should have put all the verses and added it up. So if you wanted to go by the Old Law and how they gave, it was a lot more than 10%. So that's why it's important to understand that we're to give as we can or as we've been given. So it's important for us to have the right heart to want to give back. Yes, Howard?
Not just giving when somebody's in need, but I've been self-employed for over 30 years, and it's encouraging when your brethren come and support you, whether you need the money or not. It's always encouraging when you know your brethren care. And I think that's something as Christians we all ought to do better at, is helping one another, not envious of maybe what they do or don't have or whatever, but because it's encouraging as a Christian when other Christians support you.
That's a very good point, man. And that goes back to our heart, and or we want to help our brethren and so forth. Not to mention helping others when we see them in need. So that's important. Does anyone else have any comments?
Masonry is wrong. One of the men told me one time it was a mason. Said, I'm a mason because we help one another. And that's kind of what Aaron was talking about. But they help one another. They trade with one another, support one another. One of them gets down there right at their rescue. And that's what we're seeing in New Testament Christianity. Now, they're doing it for the wrong reasons. But New Testament Christianity is saying the same thing. When a brother gets a need, you shut your mouth with compassion up. When you could have been a help, then where was the love of God in you? So, like you said, I like what Paul said, and you mentioned this, I think, last week. There's no recorded place where Jesus ever said it's more blessed to give than to receive. But he said it. Because Paul in Acts 20 said to the people at Mars Hill, said, don't forget the word, or to the elders, don't forget the words of our Lord, who said it's more blessed to give than receive. And so, you can see that whole attitude of giving, and I'll get a little bit excited about this sometimes, and I don't know, but what the first century church had a better attitude about that than we did. I've never had the inkling to sell everything I had to give the money to somebody else. But they actually did that in the first century. They'd sell their property, bring the money, and give it at the feet of the apostles, and the distribution would be made out as every man had need. Well, I hadn't got that excited about it yet, but it bothers me. We don't get more excited if we have the wherewith to do that. I don't mean give up everything you got. That's not what he meant either. But they sold a part of their land and gave all that they could.
That's a good point. Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's anywhere in Old or New Testament that it states that if I give $1, I'm going to receive less blessings than my neighbor that gave 100.
We did see that with the widow, where she gave very little, but Jesus said she gave more than the others that gave. Even though they gave a lot more money, it was a smaller portion of what they had. She was given as much as she could. So it all depends on what you have.
It'd be just like your talents too. Use what you got. If you want, people say, well, I can't give 100. The Lord don't ask you to give 100. If you got $1, that's what He asks you to give. If you got it to give, it's all about our heart. It doesn't matter how much the amount is. It's just we give. Some people's able to give. I know people that can give a whole lot of money and do. And then some people give the best. It's just as much in the sight of God what they give as the guy gave them big old amounts of money.
That's right. And if we look at Barnabas selling everything, giving all his money, well, then we also see he started doing mission trips, traveling with Paul. Well, then we see Paul and Barnabas going separate ways. we see all the trouble Paul had on his journeys and all the persecutions he had. And, Jesus said, the world's going to hate you because you love me, because the world hated me first. So if we're giving as much as we can, giving what we can with the right heart and attitude, that doesn't mean God's going to bless you and make you rich. God's going to bless us, but it may be in a different way than what we're expecting. That's why last week, we talked a lot about was it prosperity gospel? The prosperity gospel. That's not what's taught in the New Testament.
Verse 8 of 2 Corinthians chapter 9 says that God is able to make all grace abound toward you, so that you have those things that are sufficient. I wish I could read it for you. But that verse does say that. And that's not talking about prosperity gospel, but if we are giving the way we're supposed to give and we're doing the way we're supposed to do, He'll see to it we don't have a need.
That's a good point.
And it's not always giving of money, it's giving of, it doesn't have to be money, it can be time, just even cleaning, doing whatever, Some people may not have enough to give, but they've got more time.
That's true.
It's kind of fun that we talk about these things, and then we got the missionary work in Africa. Well, they didn't have a bill like this. They didn't have money to even have water. We're so abundant in everything. We ought to be so thankful.
Very true. Yes, Wesley?
I was holding a gospel meeting in Saltville, Virginia, and I was informed that this little lady would attend if I'd pick her up on the way in. Well, it was right on my way. She was, I don't know, around 70 years old, and this was years ago, and I picked her up every night. Well, at the end of the gospel meeting, she said, "Now, I want to help pay for your expenses." I said, "No, ma'am. The church is taking care of that." "Oh, no. I'm going to help pay for your expenses. It's only right that I do that. We ought to help one another." She handed me a napkin with money rolled up in it. And when I got home, I unrolled it. It was like 67 cents. And I claim that's the most I've ever been paid for a gospel meeting. Like an idiot, I spent the money. I should have put it in some felt on a picture frame and pasted that money on there and said, "This is how much some people will pay to have the gospel preached," because she truly, truly wanted to help. Now, on one occasion, Moses had to beg the children of Israel, "Please quit giving." Now, it'd be great if we had that problem today. In 2001, Elva had a heart aneurysm, nearly died. And we were amassing great medical bills. We weren't worried about it. We had good insurance. And when it came time for the insurance to pay off, the hospital came to me and said, "You may not know this, but your insurance company has gone bankrupt." Now, they were taking my premiums every month. They never told me they were in financial trouble. I sent out 5 letters and 5 emails. And money was coming in so fast from the Brotherhood. Once I told them what happened, I couldn't hardly keep it in the bank. $107,000. I called everyone that sent money, thanked them. Once my bills were paid, I said, "I'll send it back to you if you want me to, or I know people in the same boat, and I promise you I'll give it away." And they said, "Give it away." And so I gave it away and documented who I gave it to, sent letters out to those who sent money, and said, "Check on it and make sure the money was spent wisely." And that's how good the brethren are when you need them.
That's right, and that's the way we need to be. All right, we got 5 minutes. Anybody else want to give it? Yes, Ken.
Yeah, I was just going to say, God doesn't need your money. He needs you to give of yourself first. And just like Wesley's situation there, people were giving of themselves. They just happened to have financial capital that they could part with, but it was their presence, their position, their heart first that enabled them to do that. I mean, I know a lot of people. I was talking to a guy today that's a billionaire, but I don't know that he would pay me to bring him a cup of coffee. It's position of the heart.
Very true.
God wants our heart first. Give of ourselves. The church, we use financial support to do things, to function. But we've got to give of ourselves first.
Very good point. Yes, Eddie? Anything else?
Well, the first thing the president gave me, I'm sorry, go ahead. Was a hearing aid.
Go ahead, Eddie.
Somewhere in, I think in Ephesians, his verse says something to the effect, let him extol no more, but rather, let him work with his hands, that he might have to give to those who have not.
And God, even through the Old Testament, has always provided, there's always been a disparity between rich and poor people and people in the middle, but He's always provided for the poor. If you remember when you're gleaning the fields, you couldn't strip the field, and that was for those that didn't have, that could come in the evenings when everybody was done working and get some, get some of what was left. So God has always provided. And in our day and time, our economy system's different, but there's also means for us to help each other. And, as Mike said, the grace of God is always going to make sure we have what we need. We've got to, sometimes we mess up the definition between need and want, but God's always going to take care of us, and that's what we've got to realize. Yes, Wesley?
All right, what I was going to say, the first thing the brethren gave me was their heart, so to speak. I only sent out like 5 letters and 5 emails. Brethren all over America got a hold of them and scattered them all over America so that people would know the need. And then they came through realizing, hey, here's a legitimate need. And so sometimes we who know there's a need to spread the news there is a need so that others can help.
That's right. And you put all these comments together, our heart has to be in the right place. If you look at Don Blackwell and his accident, and then that sermon he gave at Polishing the Pulpit, and he talks about, he was in the same hospital as Kenny Rogers, and Kenny Rogers made a comment, I didn't get near that many cards. Don Blackwell's first comment, well, that's the brotherhood, or that's Christians. And if you go through the whole thing, and even outside of his sermon and everything that happened, his comment was always about Christianity or other Christians that helped out, or God, or Jesus. He was always in his, things didn't go the way he wanted them to go, but even when the individuals came to his house, had to redo his house so a wheelchair could go through, he was converting people. Strangers that were there as a job, not as a Christian, and some of them, they're all hearing the gospel. Just as Mike was telling us, in Tanzania, where we have examples, some wells that were already dug. Those preachers, they pretty much camp out at the well, and they are preaching to everybody that comes and gets water. And as Wesley's saying, he sent out 5 letters, but those letters multiplied because people are not ashamed to say, we've got a brother in need. A lot of times we'll see that, but we don't want to talk about somebody at church. We don't want to tell our friends it's somebody at church we're helping. Or, we've got to have our heart in the right place and take every opportunity to talk about helping other people and, having our heart in the right place.
Don's lesson's a great lesson. I'd encourage everybody to go look that up and listen to that. Me and Christy and I have listened to that 4 or 5 times. That's just an amazing lesson. That'll encourage you. It's not so bad. You got it pretty good.
That's right. Yeah, it is a good lesson. So if anybody needs help finding it, just let me know and I'll help you find it. Appreciate everybody's comments and participation, and we'll pick up with the next topic next week. Thank you.